Hello. Whenever you do a conference like this, they encourage you to use a template that looks something like this. This is the template that I normally use. So you're going to see slides that look a little different than what I expect, or what you might expect. This is me. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, and then we'll move on to the good part. In 2005, I wrote a book on OpenSSH. I encourage you to buy it and then not read it. Things have gotten better since then. System management through SSH is no longer a practice I recommend, but I did write a book on it and make money if you buy it, so I'm still going to tell you to buy it. In 2005 as well, I started a package repository called EPEL with 6 other guys, partially in Red Hat, partially outside of Red Hat. I'm still super involved in packaging. I still love software packaging. I still love RPMs. I'm not as involved in EPEL as I used to be, but if you have questions about that, happy to talk to you afterwards. Of course, I work at Puppet Labs. Kind of once I first found out about Puppet, I was kind of infatuated with the tool right away, and I wanted to work there. I wanted to figure out a way to get to Puppet Labs, and eventually I did. So we can talk about Puppet all day long as well. But I'm going to start with operations. One day, I had been in operations for about 6, 7 years, and I realized that the reason I wasn't happy is it is actually impossible to exceed expectations in operations. You cannot exceed 100% uptime. It is not possible. And that is where everybody's expectations start at. Why isn't it up all the time? So it kind of translated to nobody ever got a high five for your server staying online. They're not like, hey, you guys are awesome. That stuff didn't go down. You never get rewarded. You never get feeling better about what you're doing. You don't feel like you're making progress. So you have to find that joy in another way. So to me, I started thinking about DevOps, or this was before that really had a name, but DevOps was a thing. And now as I'm reading more about DevOps and learning about it, it's a little weird. There's a lot of press about it. There are tons of talks about it. You can go to entire conferences about it. And it's an echo chamber. It's the same people talking to the same people, talking to the same people who agree with those same people. And I like that. They're good people. They're smart people. They're great people. But it didn't seem to apply to me. I was not ever doing 10 deploys a day. I did not have rockstar ninja pirates who were just like the best people ever. I worked at a giant company. I wasn't really encouraged to write my own tools. In fact, I was strongly discouraged from writing my own tools. We had this whole buy before build strategy for everything. In DevOps, it sounded like I needed awesome application developers. We didn't even have application developers. And then it was always about startups. It was always Silicon Valley. I lived in flyover country. So everything that I just mentioned about DevOps didn't apply to me. Completely not the same, right? Like I said, I worked at a large company. When I say large, I mean 100,000 people plus. The division I was in had 1,500 people, and the IT department was 200 people. So we're talking like my department was larger than many, many startups. Still larger than Puppet Labs is today. So the average career length at this company was 19 years. The average time in that job they were in was less than 3 years, probably about 2.5. So there was this great quote there that was, we were an 85-year-old company with 3 years experience. We were awesome at what we did for certain values of awesome that are exactly the opposite of what you'd expect them to be. So there was no dev, like I said. We had application owners. And everybody was really nice. And that was the best thing you could say about the people you worked with. It was like, man, that guy does not know what he's doing. He's such a fucktard. And instead you were like, no, but he's really nice. And that was just the response for everything. It was like, but he's so nice. And it's like, yeah, I don't want to work with nice people. I want to work with people who actually help me achieve goals. And the app people would just call the vendor for problems. I was fairly convinced that the application people that I worked with when I was in infrastructure, their job was to pick up the phone and call an 800 number and put them on hold and then patch me through to that 800 number. So that was how we ran a lot of applications. It was kind of crazy. And then we want to run these big applications and customize them. So when we customize these applications, they'd be so specialized that upgrades were impossible, maintenance was impossible, and basically they didn't run. So success was measured in terms of lack of change. As long as you could just put it in the corner and not touch it, you were probably going to have uptime. Hope was the availability strategy. Hope was the DR strategy. But approvals to change things can make things OK. Because if a boss's boss's boss tells you that changing that DNS record is OK, obviously it can't go wrong. And of course, I wasn't allowed to talk about anything going on in infrastructure. I just wasn't allowed to talk about it publicly. Does this ring true for anybody? Anybody kind of been in one of those organizations before? OK, yeah. Sucks. So I had to set the stage here. I was using enterprise-y tools, I mean super enterprise-y, like Tivoli and BMC and CA and IBM. And I mean, basically, if it was a combination of letters, then you said them out loud, we were allowed to buy it. But if it was a word, you had to get extra approval. And then I spent more time on Oracle and Oracle RAC and Oracle EBS than anyone should ever have to. It's one of those things that I know a lot about it, but won't put it on my resume because the only thing that gets you is doing that again. So I don't do a lot of that. And we were doing WebSphere, and of course we had a lot of operating system. We had HPUX, Solaris, AIX, RHEL, and VMware ESX, and VMware other stuff when it was before ESX. So I had a lot of diversity to work with. That part was actually kind of interesting, except for the HPUX part. Our Unix team was 8 people. 5 of them quit in 60 days. It was tribal knowledge. That was how everything was known, more or less, and the tribe left. So basically, 5 of those 8 people were the best 5, which is no surprise. They all kind of got fed up. There was a couple management changes, and they left. I was working in a completely different division at the time, and they called me and said, hey, we need help. Can you move? Can you get down here? And I said, let's talk numbers. They met numbers. I moved. When I got there, 90 days of uptime was like, seriously, they were throwing parties. They were throwing out $100 bills if you were hitting 90 days of uptime. And I don't mean like 100% uptime for 90 days. I mean like you didn't go down between 8 and 5 for 90 days. And not Saturdays and Sundays either. It was ridiculous. And then the sysadmins, there were 3 left after the 5 quit. And one of them was literally working 16-hour days, 7 days a week. He had moved up from a help desk. And he learned everything he knew about Unix basically from logging into those other users' accounts and typing history. So he was learning, and it was cool. At the same time, the server team was blamed for everything. If the database didn't start, server problem. Database didn't work right, server problem. Web server went down, server problem. Obama wins an election, server problem. Everything was a server problem. So the state of the team, wasn't too great. There were no transfers. No one was wanting to come to our team. I told you, everybody rotates jobs 2.5, 3 years. I was begging people to come to this team. Didn't happen. There was a safe source, allegedly, of what systems I managed or what systems I was supposed to be managing and what services I was supposed to manage. Did I manage reverse proxies out on the internet? Maybe. Sometimes, if they asked me to, I guess. And then we also had a Windows team and a storage team that didn't talk together in any way. In fact, the Windows guys hated the Unix guys more than anything. The Unix guys nothinged the Windows team. They just acted like they didn't exist. And the storage guys literally sat in another building. So we were exiled. The infrastructure team was literally sent away from the main nice headquarter building, 11 floors, off to this little data center in a commercial park. They're like, you guys are kind of downers. So, OK, I got a new building. But I did willingly take that job. I didn't realize how bad it was when I took that job, but I did take that job. And there were 2 main reasons. And one of them was I knew that their safe source was LDAP, and I love LDAP directories. I think LDAP is awesome. I wrote an article a couple years ago about LDAP being the original NoSQL, but I'm not going to get into that now. Just I less than 3 LDAP. And then there were a lot of open source tools that snuck in. And when I say sneak, I mean like seriously no one knew about it. I had kind of found out through back channels and port scanning and stuff like that. So it wasn't BMC, it wasn't Tivoli, it was things like Subversion. CF Engine was in there somewhere. So there was some cool stuff. But really, my goals were nothing special. It wasn't like I'm going to fix everything. It was, I'm going to live in a new town. It's going to be cool. I'm going to learn some new stuff. And I had a goal for a long time to be the best sysadmin I could be. I wanted to be amazing at being a sysadmin. Since I had to change jobs every 2.5 to 3 years, they weren't going to let me stay a sysadmin. So the way I could do that was do it in a new location, because that counted as a job change. But really, when I got there, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know what I was getting into. The failure scenario, rewarding uptime of 90 days, I didn't know about it. I didn't get the money. So where does the story really start? Databases. Turns out if the data layer doesn't work, it doesn't matter if the rest of the layers work. They were crashing constantly. And the database team manager would always talk about, well, it was because you changed the firmware, or it was because you, added new disks, or you changed the CPUs, or the configs went wrong. That LDAP directory, you have too many read waiters, or, and I'd be like, do you even know what a read waiter is? And that was the end of the conversation. And then he heard the word kernel once, and so then that became part of the problem. It just wasn't good. So what I really figured out was we had variants. They were like, Mike, can you solve this Oracle problem? And I was like, I've written SQL before, sure. And because no one else had any Oracle experience. The guys who all did the Oracle rack stuff had all left. And it wasn't great. It was actually in a pretty horrible shape. 24 database servers were what I had. 24 unique configurations. If I had paired 24 unique individuals together and said make database servers, it would have gone better than how these were configured. I had at least 6 clusters, and they were usually clusters of 2, but each of them were not the same. And when I say not the same, I don't mean like this one had this mount point and this one had this other one. I mean like this one had this kernel, this one had another one. This one was rel 3, this one was rel 3.6. Like it wasn't close. And some of them had different hardware, different firmware, different everything. Some of it you compiled the stuff for your kernel drivers. Some of it you installed from packages. Downtime was a way of life. So what do you do from there? I worked a lot. I cried a lot. I drank a lot. How many people know what this is? Okay, so we were a Six Sigma shop. And to me, Six Sigma was always a story of funny belts. You get a black belt for your project manager, and you get green belts for project people, and yellow belts if you've spelled the word project before or something. Like, I don't really know exactly how it worked, but it was a way of life. So Six Sigma. And I ended up talking to my manager for quite a while about this because I thought it was just some kind of psychobabble bullshit to get projects done on time or measure them incorrectly or whatever. And what happened was we got to this point of the conversation. This is everything you need to know about Six Sigma in one sentence. No, wait, two. I'm not an English major. Reduce the standard deviation, then raise the mean. And what that really means is you want to fail in consistent ways and then get better. So doing DevOps outside of WebOps, which before, again, DevOps wasn't really a thing yet because this was 2007, 2008, I wanted to reduce my variability. So I started planning all these changes. And it really came down to, I was trying to negotiate with database admins on, I need to change Windows, I need to change Windows, I need to change the firmware, we got to be the same everywhere, let's do the storage zoning the same way, let's do the network configuration the same way. And they were pushing back all the time. They're like, no, it'll be down. And I'm like, it's going to be down either way. So you can either take it down because of I know about it and I've scheduled it, or you can have it go down because it just blows up. Eventually, I got some results. So failing in known ways. Everything was failing, but it was because of disk problems. And I knew it this time. That's better. It wasn't random network crap. It wasn't bonds that didn't work correctly. It wasn't a mismatched kernel. It wasn't OCFS. It was just the disk zoning, or the disk planning. So better uptime, still not great. Fewer configurations, which meant that I could tell other people how to solve some of the problems that we were getting because there were fewer of them. And I still got lots of tickets on disk management, either layouts, file systems, adding new disks. It seemed like they were growing at rates that were unhealthy, but that happens in databases. So the lead of the database team drives over to my building, because we're in exile, and says, hey, these database problems, I think we could fix them as DBAs if we had the rights to. And the security guy in me says, that is the worst idea I've ever heard. The guy who was up at 3 in the morning all the time said, yeah, why not? Let's try it. Sure. So I gave them sudo to manage disks. And on that database team, there were 2 or 3 guys that absolutely could manage disk. There were several that couldn't, but that's OK. They usually actually handed it to the 2 or 3 guys that could, or they would call us, and that's acceptable as well. So we had the shared responsibility for the outages now. Now when things went wrong, it was, well, did the database team mess up that disk layout? Did the systems team? And sometimes it was either of us. And the other thing was, I wanted to start sharing the pain. I was like, if you have rights to mess this stuff up, you have rights to learn about when it's not working. So we had the if I'm awake, you're awake strategy. If I got a page, the first thing I did was call a DBA and say, we're working on this until it's fixed. And it also really, really, really encourages proper classification of systems. I don't know if you've ever worked somewhere where somebody can say, this is test, well, except for this one thing that runs in prod, or this was a dev box, but then, dude's workstation blew up, so we had to make it production. And like, that happens in real life. So what I said was, if it's production, it pages us 24/7. And when I say us, I mean you and me, both of us. If it's test, 8 to 5. Test needs to be up when people are working. If it's dev, let me know. I'll get to it, maybe. Unless there's a special thing going on, like all the developers are standing around because of something. I mean, there are special cases, but it was really about classifying systems correctly. So you had to put some trade-offs in there, incentives. And they were like, wait, I don't want to be paged by every single system that's going down. And I was like, well, why have I been for the last year? Well, once you start sharing that pain, you get a little bit of gain. So you share the pain. And what I really learned was people who carry the pager make systems better. You thought it was just ops people, but it's not. It's people that call 800 numbers to Oracle. They will even do a better job. They'll call it Oracle and get smarter things on, what's their knowledge network called for Oracle? I don't remember. But Metalink, yes. They'll find the Metalink that makes things better. So method 2 is stop, collaborate, and listen. In the great words of Vanilla Ice, obviously. That's where I take all of my ideas from. But really, it's about breaking down silos. So I was working well with the database team. They started to trust me. I started to kind of trust them. We were improving. The blame game was still going on. It wasn't always from the database team. It turns out there were, I don't know, 18, 20, 25 other teams that had servers from my team. So blame happens. I still got blamed. Obama still won an election. Server team that was still their fault. So we had a lot of RCAs, or root cause analysis meetings. You can call them postmortems. You can call them whatever you want. We had a catastrophic outage at one point where we had zoned a large pool of storage. We thought we were zoning it to one array and having it like virtualized through an SVC from IBM. And we did that, but we also zoned it somewhere else. Not so good. So we brought down dozens of systems, and they were all the ones that make a lot of money. People noticed, turns out. So what do we do? Blame storage team sucks, dude. No, not really. Not really. By that time, they were on our team. We wrote up exactly what went wrong, time frame by time frame, down to the minute, of what we did, how we fucked it up, how we were going to shout about it, what time happened, what the misconfiguration was, what the impact was, what was the remediation plan to go forward. And we walked out of that meeting in 10 minutes. It was scheduled for 4 hours because they were so upset about it. It had to be this giant big deal, and heads were going to roll. And we wrote up and said, look, this is exactly what happened. This is exactly what went wrong. Here's how we're going to fix it. Here's the documentation plan to improve. Here's a script that even tells us if something's zoned in 2 spots incorrectly. And they were all like, well, yeah, OK. So, things were starting to improve. We were starting to see some trust built up between the infrastructure team, some of the application teams, kind of these were like the ITIL people that were running these RCAs. Life was not perfect. Setbacks were still happening. Everything was not getting better. This had been about a year, I think, that I had been at this company, drinking heavily. And we had some wonderful failures. My favorite failure had to do with NFS. We had a sysadmin who was really smart and really stupid at the same time. I had a manager who described this guy as whenever he goes to take a bite of cereal, he goes like this with a spoon. He makes it the most complicated setup possible, but still gets the job done. And it was such a great description for this guy. NFS, really nice. You can share your files. I'm sure you guys know what that is. He decided that he was going to NFS export his home directory from his workstation to every system that we managed. So that was like 400 systems. That went really well. We had some issues. Some stale NFS mounts. And then he just unplugs his laptop and goes home, right? So, DF on every monitoring script hangs. Nothing much. So that was one of my favorite things. When he renamed his workstation, like the NSM team calls me and they're like, hey, all these connections that used to happen over here, they're happening on this new IP address. What's going on? And I'm like, oh, he built a new workstation. Like, a little crazy. So we tried to reel that in, but there'd be another reason why something crazy had to happen like that again. It was kind of a Rube Goldberg guy. During a core switch migration, this was probably another 12 months after that, we were moving our storage fabric. We were getting new switches. They were like Cisco directors. And we were probably 16 hours into this change because we were cutting over the entire data center all at once, actually 2 data centers all at once. And the same guy, I'm like, hey, can you fix this one system? It's complaining about not seeing all of its disk. So, can you tell me what's going on? We check back a half an hour later, me and another guy were working on some other problems. And he's like, well, it's not complaining anymore. Not complaining is not the same thing as putting the disk back. Maybe I should have been more clear. He decided that he would just overwrite all the LVM metadata so that volume group no longer knew those disks exists. So catastrophic failures are fun. And the configuration management stuff, like I said, there was CF Engine there when I got there. It wasn't just CF Engine. There was this tool called ISConf. ISConf was actually calling CF Engine, which then called ISConf again on HPUX, which then called CF Engine again to manage Solaris. It was the worst. How do you unpack that? How do you unravel that? Well, I'm going to get into that story in a little bit. So there were other experiments going on, though. There were things that I was starting to have more free time because our uptime was getting better. I was getting blamed for less. My team was getting blamed for less. I just got fascinated with software development. I was a CS major, and then I went into ops right away. And so I had always been kind of fascinated with development practices. I started reading about Agile. I think I started playing with Rails in like 2000. Was 2005 the year it got really big? I don't know. It was right around then. It was either 2005, 2006. And started playing with it. And so I started reading all these Agile books coming out of Prague. And I was like, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try it. I read Ship It. I read Automate It. I read Manage It. And it was really good. Like half this stuff worked great in ops. Who knew? Then I started trying to teach my team SDLC. I was like, we're going to plan. We're going to write tests. We're going to write specifications, gather requirements, and then we're going to implement. And we're going to test again. Make sure our test we already wrote pass. We're going to be awesome. And some of the people totally got it and totally loved it and became much, much, much better sysadmins. Some of them thought I was on crack. They were like, I don't need to know crap about programming. And they probably shouldn't have. But I also had big failures. I wrote an inventory service that was the equivalent of SSHing out to every box, grabbing as much configuration as I could find, and then shoving it in Subversion. I thought it was going to be awesome to track changes over time. Turns out it was awesome at taking up lots of disk space. So TDD. I started thinking about it more and more. How do I do TDD on infrastructure? Monitoring was part of it. If monitoring can tell me what went wrong in production, why couldn't it tell me what went wrong in staging or in tests or in dev? And I could do that earlier, and then I would know. So I started trying to do that. I wrote this test suite that applied to every system. It would tell me, this box should have RAID 0, or this box should have RAID 1, or this box should have these packages installed and these users set up and this key configuration. And it wasn't all stuff that I could put in a configuration tool really easily, because sometimes I had to do with really weird hardware stuff and hardware configurations with blades. But when I would run it, it would just output all these results into RHN. I'd use the API to like have this notes field, and like the satellite would just tell me this server was passing on this date and it had these tests, and it was kind of neat. I think the second that I left that job, that was disabled, but I liked it a lot. We also wrote this thing that I thought was going to be the biggest failure of all time. We were trying to farm out account management because we were spending a lot of our time doing it. So I whipped up this PHP application because I thought somebody else might be able to maintain PHP. Ruby was out of the question at the time. And handed it to the help desk, and they thought it was the greatest thing ever. Win. I didn't do account management anymore. And then, to add fun, I didn't like CF Engine or ISConf. So I was like, hey, what if we use Puppet and call it with CF Engine? So we did. So experimentation is important. Once you have time to experiment, you can find a lot of things out about your infrastructure and your team. That was way too many clicks. There we go. Failures are still valid data. It's one of the things that a lot of cultures don't accept. And I think, was it Jez that mentioned that today? Failures are still totally OK. If failures are not OK, then experimentation is not OK, then innovation is not OK. And I would fail in small, hopefully I would fail in small ways that didn't impact the business in large ways. But we had ideas that did not work many, many, many times. I tried to have all my monitoring go into Jenkins so I could have this green ball plugin on a dashboard, and it didn't work at all. So there are a lot of things that I've tried that did not work. There are a lot of things I tried that did work, but having the freedom to play with it is really important. So I was doing a periodic review about once a month. I would look at every ticket that came in and say, how do I fix these problems? How do I make it go away? How do I give my system administrators more time to do their job? And it's finding the biggest pain point. And there were two things. One was, I think printers was one of it. It was like 240 or 280 tickets 1 month doing print queue setups. So you automate that, or you work on automating that, or you help automate that. And it started to go away. The other thing is, we had really, really, really reduced the time it took to provision a server. When I first got there, I think it was around 6 weeks, because we were always ordering something. We were always having to wait for ISOs. We didn't have a kickstart server that worked or anything like that. That all got implemented. We wrote a little self-service interface. And it was really cool. So now the server got to sit in the database team for 4 weeks instead of sitting in our team for 4 weeks. That really didn't matter at all to the business. We optimized in a point that didn't matter in any way. And we didn't know that. We weren't looking holistically at the picture. We were doing local optimizations and not global. So the problem was the database team had to sit there because they were so backed up they couldn't configure rack, or they couldn't configure the Oracle client, or they couldn't get the disk that they needed, or whatever it was. So it was wasted effort. So to drive value up the stack, I was really starting to get into this collaboration thing. I thought maybe there was something to it. One-click Oracle install on client. And what that was in the provisioning process, you would check a box and say, I want an Oracle client, because it turns out a lot of apps want an Oracle client. They clicked it, and Puppet would apply it. You have Oracle Instant Client, your TNS names is good, and now your system's there. And that saved 2 to 5 days from the DBAs. After about a week of that, they came to me and said, hey, what's this Puppet thing I've been hearing about? Is that what's doing my Oracle client installs? And after they get over the, you're taking our gerbs type activity, they go back to the, well, what else can you automate? Like, can you get me rack setup, or can you go OCFS setup? And so we started talking about what other items could you just one-click install through our interface. And that was the first time I actually felt like I was going to be able to do something with Puppet for real. Like, I didn't have to hide it from every manager that was in there. So part of that, driving value up the stack, was really explaining what I was doing and how I was able to do it. And I was trying to find metrics that people understood. And remember, these people were changing jobs every 2.5 years. So latency didn't really matter, and indexing didn't really matter. It was all, what's important? Well, uptime was really important because we got bonuses based on uptime. But the way they measured it was not at all what we would call real life. It was like, well, between 8 and 5, the uptime measures this, and there's a coefficient of uptime that matters after 6 p.m., and it didn't matter anymore. You were always going to get your bonus, which is good if you like a paycheck, and I do, but it really didn't help my uptime. What helps uptime? What helps metrics? Dollars. So one day, I wanted to buy a $20,000 license for an AIX box to do something. I don't remember what the software was exactly. I think it was something from CA. And the manager's like, you want to spend $20,000 on one system. You're nuts. And I said, OK. It just so happened that day our quarterly earnings report came out. So, and I calculated it, and there was a sub-earnings report for what my division had done. And I decided to take, well, what's the revenue that our business unit had generated? OK, what's that in the average number of days? OK, what percentage of our overall money intake goes through this set of systems? What percent goes through this one? Turned out $6 million a day went through that one system. I was asking for $20,000. Put that report on her desk, and she said, oh, ship it. So she asked how I came up with that number. I showed her the formula, and she was like, why don't we do this for all of our applications? And I was like, I don't know. Why don't we? I would love to know what downtime costs. $6 million a day, maybe I should invest in some redundancy. Learning. People learn through dollars and metrics. No matter, like if you don't like IT, if you're a manager of IT, you learn through metrics. You learn through how do you quantify downtime. So I was trying to adjust the behavior of the organization using the things they already cared about. They weren't going to care about, I was cool. I could go read DevOps books, or I could go hang out at DevOps days, or like, I don't know, get a cool tech hoodie. They didn't care. They did care that the dollars they were spending were returning value. One of the key things that I also learned during this period was that retiring technology is way, way, way more expensive than introducing it. Getting rid of my stupid subversion inventory script probably took a month and a half because it had impact. Other things were using it as a dependency. And I guess this is something that when I was an architect later on, I was a big infrastructure architect, and this just came across my desk constantly, or came out of my outbox, came in your inbox constantly. I was just like, think about how hard this will be to replace. And you might not want to have 4 reporting systems, because getting rid of that 4th one's really hard. And like, no, eventually we'll get down to 1. Sure you will. I guess, so when you're experimenting, you want to do it in a very controlled way, because you might be totally wrong. But during this time, I got to learn a lot. I got to learn Python, Ruby, Puppet, jQuery, Git, REST, web services. We did retrospectives. We started to talk about what went right, what went wrong, what were we doing, and why were we doing it. And we started kind of leading by example. We were no longer having problems. We were actually doing more and more. We were like, hey, we're going to host all the subversion repositories for everyone. We're going to host all the reverse proxies on the internet. We're going to host some of the firewall configs. We're going to host the call recording stuff. We just kept adding services that we could manage. And they're like, how are you doing this? And I'm like, well, we define the problem. We gather requirements. We work on it. We test it. Repeat. So, and we kept doing continuous improvement. Are we satisfied with how they work, with how things work? I tried to make it better. Was my department better off? Probably not. There was 200 people. I was a team of 8 or 9, 10 people. It wasn't great. The department still wasn't amazing. It wasn't like everybody was going to be like, I want to leave Silicon Valley and go work in the middle of flyover country. Wasn't going to happen. Wasn't cool. But we were getting better, and I was happy with that. During this period, I loved my job. And I mean, I loved my job. So how was I really measuring improvements? My boss asked me that. He's like, why do you think you're good at your job? Like, what makes you think you're good? Because they couldn't tell if I was good. And I said, well, there are other teams that come to me for advice. They come to me and say, how do you do this? How do we take on more? How does the database team add SQL Server as a database offering? Can we automate that? Can we work on it? What about monitoring? What about design? Can you help me architect this thing so it doesn't fail all the time? And I felt pretty good about that. I thought that was a good measure. If other teams are coming to me asking our team how we're doing, I thought that was pretty good. I was also getting transfer requests. I finally had people saying, hey, I want to be on the server team. You guys do awesome work. And it was cool. So we were plugged in. We were finally getting people saying, I have to move jobs soon. That timeline's ticking. Can I come to infrastructure? And of course, we selected the ones that were the ones we wanted and took them. The rest of them had to go work on the next horrible application. So it was really about solving causes and not symptoms. I had a Windows admin who would close tickets like it was no one's business. He would close hundreds and hundreds and hundreds a month. And one day I said, why do you get hundreds and hundreds of those tickets? And he was like, I never thought about it. He just did the work. That little PHP application I wrote to do accounts, turns out it just, adds some more code and those tickets go away. So, solve causes, not symptoms. That whole little subsection is about that. Continuous improvement. Look for ways to get better constantly. So what does this have to do with DevOps culture? Well, 5 things you can do to change the behavior of your team. Your team's behavior changes, your influence increases, your happiness increases, your required drinking decreases. So that was what I was really working on. I wanted to make sure that we knew we were failing in consistent ways. I was working with other teams to the best of my ability. When I fucked up, I yelled about it. When my team messed up, we were like, hey, we totally did not do that right. And here's how we're not going to do that again. That was really important. I really like being super honest and transparent about what happens. We experimented everywhere that we could. We tried everything. We failed miserably a lot of times. It was fun. And then solving causes, not symptoms, is super important. So, am I doing WebOps? Am I doing 100 deploys a day? Do I have really cool testing? Was everything written in Ruby or Clojure or Haskell or the language du jour that everybody wants? Oh, Go. That's the one everybody's on right now, right? So it wasn't. We weren't doing anything like that. But I still felt like 4 years into that team was significantly better. And it wasn't all me. I had a couple really good people around me as well. In fact, I just hired one of them at Puppet Labs. Woo. So I guess it's really important to have good people around you. It's really important to work towards something better. And everything that I had read about DevOps was all about culture, but it wasn't telling you how to improve it. It was just like, you need to have an awesome culture. If your culture sucks, you can walk out. You can just quit and go somewhere that you think has a better culture. That is totally a viable option, depending on your whole situation. Do you have family? Do you have kids? Are you relocatable? Are you able to get hired somewhere else? There's a lot of variables there. You can also just try and make your current situation better. I tried that. I thought I succeeded at it for about 4 years. As a sidebar, I took over this job from some people that you guys probably know. These 2 guys founded Puppet Labs. They worked at the company that I just described. This is what I inherited. ISConf calling CF Engine, calling ISConf, calling CF Engine. From these guys. So, I had rock stars. I had people that were the best in the business at this stuff. And they just didn't care. Or they weren't good at it. Or they were learning. Or they were experimenting. And actually reading through some of that ISConf code, I can see where Puppet came from. Totally. This is the bar where I drank heavily. And you saw Fryman talk yesterday in this room, possibly, and Aziz is at GitHub too. There was this club of people that just drank every day, or every Thursday at least, in Nashville at this place. And that was where I got to know a lot of these guys. And so getting help from the outside really, really mattered. It was people that didn't work where I worked. It was people that did work where I work. It was people that used to work where I work. Being able to bounce ideas off people, being able to rant, being able to let go, being able to drop F-bombs like no one's watching is really important. Thank you. That's what I have to say about DevOps. I think you can do it better. I think you can improve your culture. I'll take questions. If anybody has them, you can step up to the mic on the side there. All right. I hope you guys had a great PuppetConf.